I would like to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Professor Kisha Tracy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris. I want to thank Chris a lot. He's been very helpful at getting everything organized, and the whole committee has been great about the program they put together, especially in the challenges of having two back-to-back Tuesday snowstorms that changed the program a bit. So welcome, everyone. I hope we'll have some more pop in as we get started here. Give me 1 second to present my screen. It worked a half an hour ago, so we'll hope that it continues to work now. All right, we're good? Everybody can see? Excellent. All right. I'm actually, I'll give you the link to this later at the end of the presentation. So you'll have the full link with all of the other links that are available within it as we go. All right, so today I'm talking about a topic that I hadn't really thought about talking about until the call came out with the topic for this year's Black History Month. It's something that I realized as I was thinking about what I could possibly contribute, that it's something that I've actually done a lot with and talked a lot about in my classes, but had never thought about it as a kind of cohesive topic. So this has been really exciting to put together, and I'm very happy to share the kinds of things that I've been thinking about and gathered over the past few months. I do want to highlight the fact that the description of the topic for Black History Month, the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. I have the description here from the website, but highlighting that last sentence, its representation, identity, and diversity has been reverenced, stereotyped, and vilified from the days of slavery to our own time. The one thing that I would qualify on that statement, this is very much an American, the Black History Month is about American Black history for the most part, but I would highlight that last section that there is Black history before the transatlantic slave trade and before American Black history. And so, and it's very important to American Black history to be able to understand how all of this works together. My specialty is medieval studies. And so I'm always kind of pushing the time period back on a lot of endeavors because we tend to want to stay in the present. But I do want to highlight that there's a history beyond that. I visited a couple of years ago, seems like 1,000 before the pandemic. I visited Washington, D.C. and visited the African American History Museum there and was really impressed with the first level that you come into is all about this the pre-transatlantic slave trade. And it's really quite something to take a look at and to experience. So I hope this gives you a little bit of context today. I do want to give a few content advisories on this. I have them listed here in the presentation, but there will be discussions and mentions imagery related to pregnancy, especially issues concerning pregnancy and child rearing for minority communities. You can't talk about this without talking about systemic and historical racism. There will be mentions and discussions of rape, slavery, police brutality, white supremacy, and whitewashing. So just be prepared as we move forward that some of these topics are going to come up. So to start very broadly, the Middle Ages and Black heritage, it's not something you might think of when you first think of the Middle Ages, but there are a lot of issues that are coming into play in the study of the Middle Ages now that we really need to take in consideration. Just a few of them that I have down here. The misrepresentation of the Middle Ages. There's a white supremacist fantasy. And I mentioned, that Black history goes before the transatlantic slave trade. White supremacist fantasy would have it that there is no Black history, but that doesn't exist, that exists before that. But there is. There's plenty. It's a part of the fabric of world history and world culture that we need to take into account. And there's a huge misrepresentation of that. We need to talk more about racism in and after the Middle Ages. A lot of things that get put at the door of the Middle Ages are not actually a part of the Middle Ages, and some things that should be aren't discussed to a great extent. So we really need to think a lot more about the history of the topic of racism. In the last few years, we've really seen an influx of the study of the global Middle Ages. Particularly, I like to focus on medieval Africa because I've taught a couple of courses on it now and teaching another one at present. And there's really a lot more. The Middle Ages is about more than Europe. And we don't always know that, or the popular perception of the Middle Ages is not always about that. So it's important to remember that there's a whole world going on during this period and that we need to be looking at it. And then again, Black heritage before the transatlantic slave trade is very, very important. So I want to talk again broadly, starting at the medieval family. I'm going to put a chat question to you. You can drop it into the chat. What comes to mind when you think of families in the Middle Ages? And I know we have some experts on here, so don't skew the data. But if somebody asked you that question, and I am asking you that question, what do you think about families in the Middle Ages, medieval families? What do you think of whenever that phrase is said? Don't be shy. You can drop it into the chat. Game of Thrones. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, white. All right. Game of Thrones is an interesting one because it only talks really about the nobles, right? It's all about nobility. There's nothing about the average family during the Middle Ages. Domestic, marriage of convenience, or arranged marriages. We think about that a lot as part of the family structure of the Middle Ages. That's popular conception of this particular time period. I'll just kind of talk about, and these are great, talk about a few of these and kind of maybe give you something else to think about. For one thing, there's a variation over 1,000+ years in geographies of what the Middle Ages actually is. And I just said the Middle Ages is the whole world, so that's a lot of time periods over 1,000 years and a lot of geographies, a lot of different societies. So being able to narrow down one way that a medieval family is would be like saying, well, this is the way the American family is. And we can't do that, right? There's too much variation and too many things to consider. We often have this sense, and I think maybe Demisty was getting at that a little bit with marriages of convenience or arranged marriages, that there's not a lot of feeling involved in medieval families or pre-modern families of any kind. That there's no emotion, right? That no emotion exists. There's no affection. This is not true. We're human beings, and families have been families, across time. Granted, there are differences, and we need to study those differences and all of that sort of thing. But there is a sense, a growing understanding that there were emotional attachments to children. There were emotional attachments between family members. And now we can move to the medieval mother. And a lot of times we talk about, and it's true, and the idea that of how women have been treated or perceived over time, right? There's a lot of issues that exist with that. But I think we also take it to the extreme and forget about some of the other characteristics that were during the Middle Ages. A lot of times the role of the medieval mother was dependent upon social status. We might think of it as being the opposite, but wealthy families actually might have had less ability to maneuver and less ability to have authority than, say, poorer families in which the medieval mother contributed to the economic situation of the family. So there's a lot of there's different ways to kind of look at this, especially when you're looking at it from different social status. Quite often, the medieval mother was the manager of the home and often business affairs. There's a really great book about how women were involved in beer making and the beer making process and selling. And it's really an interesting process to see how many women were involved in that. Women were the influencer of children. They were under the supervision of their mothers and other women. Actually, there's a school of thought that Christianity spread as fast as it did through the female parts of the family because they were influencing the children, and then the children, were holding certain beliefs. So there's all kinds of ways that mothers were a very big part of what was going on. Another kind of conception about the Middle Ages is kind of a lack of domestic relationship, or if there is a domestic relationship, that it involves domestic violence. Yes, the domestic violence definitely occurred in the Middle Ages, but it's likely that it didn't occur any more than it does now. That is, it is simply a part of society, and that we like to believe that the past is a lot more violent than us because we like to believe that we're different and we're better. But in a lot of ways, we need to think more about the nuances of that and what we can learn from these particular areas, and maybe what they can help us to do better. So I don't have time today to really talk about all the different religions that existed during the Middle Ages, and I feel badly about that, and hopefully I can rectify that at some point. But I'm going to focus in particular on the Christian family, the Christian mother. And the first family, since we just had an inauguration, I'll use that terminology. The Christian first family is Mary, Joseph, and Christ, right? That is the kind of the central family that exists within the Christian religion. We should really think about the other religions and how mothers are a part of those communities as well. However, I do want to point that out, that I just don't have the time today to go too much into that. What I'm going to focus on is Black mothers in the Christian tradition here, and I'm going to start with the Black Madonna tradition, which may be a tradition that you've heard of. It may be something that is familiar to you in some ways, but hopefully I'll be able to contextualize it a little bit here. So the Black Madonna tradition, as defined by Tracy, is mainly of medieval origin. These are statues or paintings of dark or black features, and they usually have some sort of miraculous character. That there's stories of miraculous events around these images or anything along those lines. The Black Madonna was a fairly prevalent phenomenon in the Middle Ages. Across Europe, there are hundreds of these that we can find. There is some controversy about them as to the intention of how they were created. Were they created to be black? All of these sorts of things. But for our purpose today, we're gonna talk about them as if they were purposeful, because the audience who went to see them were going to see them as Black Madonnas, and continue to go see them as Black Madonnas. So that's how we're gonna perceive them today. The Black Madonna is said to have come out of the tradition from the Bible, from the Song of Songs. There's a phrase, "Nigra sum sed formosa," I am black, and I put a slash, but beautiful, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. There's a controversy about the translation of this particular text as to whether, if it says "I am black and beautiful," there's a difference between that and "I am black but beautiful," right? So there's a lot of controversy about how to actually translate that phrase, and it really can change how you perceive and analyze these particular figures. So the one that you see over here is a very famous one that has that phrase actually written in the halo above the Black Madonna. The Black Madonna didn't stay in Europe. It definitely spread beyond European borders and beyond the Middle Ages. I could give you when I give you the link, you'll have the link to this list here of Black Madonnas around the world. But I give you one in particular that a community member made me aware of in Africa, in Algiers, the Notre Dame d'Afrique, Our Lady of Africa. It's a 19th century Black Madonna. I find it interesting in particular because of its phrase that exists above it, which is "Our Lady of Africa, pray for us and for the Muslims." This is a Black Madonna that is intended to bring together communities and religions, which I think is a very fascinating aspect of this as well. Actually, and on the website that's dedicated to these particular parishes, and it's a missionary site, and I have some issues with that in particular. But what I did like about the description that was talked about it is that the Our Lady of Africa is intended to make up a single large family, that it is a part of a worldwide family. Again, the Black Madonna has gone far beyond the Middle Ages and far beyond Europe. We actually have at least one, and I know we have more, but I'll focus on this one in particular, a local Black Madonna that's in Clinton, Massachusetts, at the St. John the Guardian of Our Lady Parish. It used to belong to Our Lady of Jasnagora, and it's actually based on A very famous image of the Black Madonna, which is from the Częstochowa in Poland. And this is a Black Madonna, has a whole really interesting history. Its miraculous events include that it saved an army. It all kinds of things were involved around it. It ended up having a slash. The original painting ended up having a slash across its throat. Various things like that. And so the image really took on a lot of life for itself. And the one in Clinton, Massachusetts, is based upon that particular Black Madonna. So I'll ask you another chat question. What do you think about the Black Madonnas that you've seen so far? You're also allowed to talk out loud. It's okay. I know we don't do a lot of that these days, but it's perfectly fine. What do you think of these images?
I came in a little late, but I kind of wanted to ask if it was addressed about any kind of connection with Isis, the Egyptian goddess, and her cultus that was spread across Europe before the oncoming of Christianity.
We don't have any.
That maybe the Black Madonnas were converted versions.
Yeah, we don't have any specific research that links the two. But there's certainly some very interesting correlations between, and the images have some similarities. Yeah. Excellent. More historically accurate than the white images, absolutely, Laura. Right? We'll get to whitewashing here in a little bit, but the idea that should the Madonna actually be lily white? Probably not. Yeah, plain looking. Madonnas tend to be, their clothing tends to be far more elaborate than their facial features in a lot of ways. Color seems to connect it to Africanness. Domestic, I agree with you. I think they're beautiful. I think I'm always fascinated by looking at. I'm fascinated also by looking at the different hues of blackness that exist across these, and what how those are represented in a lot of ways. Luminescent. These are this is in that grand tradition of medieval icons, which are always rather golds and blues and reds, right? These really vibrant colors that exist. Excellent. So I want to connect this then to something that's very important to us right now, which should have been important to us for quite some time, which is Black Lives Matter movement. In 2016, this image that I give you here is the Our Lady Mother of Ferguson and all those killed by gun violence. Our Lady of Ferguson is what it's usually called by Mark Dukes. With a very striking image, right? This looks very similar to the Black Madonnas that I showed you before, and then across her womb you have the hands raised and the don't shoot gesture, and the gun sight, right? The over the top of this silhouetted black figure. It's a very powerful image. The Black Madonna has been used by Black Lives Movement artists in a variety of fashions. I give you these three exhibitions in particular. Mark Stephen Greenfield's is particularly evocative work because he talks about that what he does, why he wanted to use the Black Madonna, is the idea that it was a symbol that has come to be associated with universal love. And now he's paralleling it against things like police brutality and all of these other issues that exist. And so here's an image. Here's one of my favorites, which is called Toppling, where you see the Black Madonna image in the front, very similar to the medieval Black Madonnas. And in the background, you see the Confederate statue that is being taken down and toppled. This is pretty good example of his work. You usually have the Madonna in the front with something going on over her shoulder back here. And so she has a lot of representation. He has a lot of representation of this particular kind of work. I also want to highlight here the Black Lives Movement is really one very powerful aspect of it is the voices of the mothers of those who have been killed. And we have mothers of victims who have, spoken out, who have shown their grief to the world at the loss of their children through police brutality and similar types of killings. This is actually an image from Beyonce's Lemonade. These are three mothers who lost their children. And it really has a resonance with both mothers and mothers-to-be. When George Floyd was killed, he cried out for his mother, who had died a few years earlier. And this image was a really powerful image, at least for me, that came out of the protest, where Thema, who's the protester in the image, she said, "The video of his death and hearing him cry out for his mother will forever be embedded in my head. I truly believe that when Mr. Floyd called out for his mother, all mothers were summoned of all ages." And this was a statement that, again, brought together a part of maternal tradition, which is the grieving mother, right? And so again, you have what are actually, they actually created a part of a group called Mothers of the Movement, which is the fact that there's enough mothers to have a Mothers of the Movement unto itself is problematic. But they have come together and speak quite frequently. I'm not going to show this video for the sake of time. But again, you'll have this link and you can see it later. There's some really powerful statements in here about, one of them starts off with, just talking about her son, who her son was before he was killed and what his dreams were. So it's a very powerful image. And it's an image that really ties back to the medieval mother, the medieval Christian mother in particular. There's a medieval tradition called Mater Dolorosa, which is the sorrowing mother, which is Mary at the foot of the cross, weeping when her son Christ is killed. We can't really pinpoint exactly when, but right around 1220 is when this really started taking off. You start seeing altars and statues and all of these sorts of things. We have the designation of the feast day for Our Lady of Sorrows in 1423. Perhaps the most famous is Michelangelo's Pietà, which is it's the image of Mary with Christ's body on her lap. I give you a piece of literature here from the Middle Ages that I think is very evocative. It's the dispute between Mary and the cross. It's a 14th century text in Middle English. And it's all about Mary. Mary is standing up before God, essentially, and wanting the cross to be blamed for her son's death. She's wanting the cross to be punished for her son's death. And there's different witnesses that come forward to talk about Mary's experience at the foot of the cross. And we have one here where it says, out of the cross the knife come though, out of the cross the knife came. It pierced her. Hail swapte on swooning through that shansa. She fell swooning through that event. It's a very strong moment describing the grief. And I think it can be very much tied to this idea of the Mothers of the Movement and the type of grief that they represent and have shown to us publicly and had to show to us publicly as a result of the deaths of their children. I'll move from Mary to another figure, which is the Queen of Sheba. And we're going to move to Christian Ethiopia in Africa. So instead of the Black image of the mother in Europe, we're going to move to the Black Christian mother in Africa. Sheba's a very fascinating figure. She's the mother of Menelik the First, who was the first emperor of Ethiopia and Solomonic dynasty. And the reason that is that they believed that he was also the son of King Solomon of Old Testament fame. This is mostly legendary, as you can tell from this particular story. There's several in all of the religious traditions that are Abrahamic, the Abrahamic traditions. They have stories about Sheba. The Kebra Nagas is the Ethiopian 14th century Ethiopian version of the story of Sheba. Now, what's interesting about it is in the other versions, the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim version, and other Christian and Muslim versions, she's usually represented as kind of this silly creature. They talk a lot about her hairy legs. She's always, talks about, she's kind of the one who, she's not very smart. She gets outsmarted by King Solomon and all of those sorts of things. When it comes to the Kebra Nagast and the Queen of Sheba, she is a very wise person. She is a great leader. She doesn't get outfoxed. She actually gets raped and outseduced to a certain extent, and that is where the son of Solomon that becomes the king of Ethiopia actually comes from. There's also text in the Arab, the Sirat Saif ibn Diyazan, and it doesn't include the same types of things, but it does put the Queen of Sheba as a mother. Really that's the function that she has as a mother, is the forefront of both the Kebra Nagast and the Sirat Saif. So there's this sense of this character who is really, has all of these other things going for her, but her character as a mother is very important. The thing about the Kebra Nagast also is that it was actually written into the Ethiopian Constitution of 1955 as historical truth. They're still telling this story in Ethiopia kind of over and over. So it's a very present story. The Sheba is a very present character within Ethiopia. To return to whitewashing, as we started talking about it a little bit, so the Black Madonna and figures like the Queen of Sheba, you will often see them represented as very white. And so this image that I have here, that I actually took at Magdeburg Cathedral, is a 13th century, and it is a Black Madonna, but it was cleaned in the 19th century. So you can see what it looks like now. I actually was looking at the brochure because I was there to see two things. I was there to see St. Maurice's statue, and I was there to see the Black Madonna. And I have this brochure that says the Black Madonna is around this corner. It is on this wall. I went by it, I can't tell you how many times, before I realized that this was actually the Black Madonna. And they still call it that, even though it has been quote unquote cleaned, which happened to quite a few of the Black Madonnas, especially in the 19th century. Not only in the 19th century, this is the image, the cover image for this presentation. This is the really famous Black Madonna at Chartres Cathedral in France. The one on the left is the one I took in 2013. The one on the right is what she looks like now after a cleaning in 2017. As you can tell, she looks very different. We have stories of people who make pilgrimages to go to Chartres to see the Black Madonna, who got there and realized that the Black Madonna was no longer there, that she was no longer Black. And so it's really, there's a lot that goes into this. Again, we have, a lot of research to do and a lot of things to figure out about the origins of the Black Madonna. But one thing is true, people go to see them frequently because they are the Black Madonna. And to do this to this particular figure, I find it very problematic and find it very sad for a number of reasons. But the idea that whitewashing is alive and present today with these particular statues. So on that note, what are your thoughts about the whitewashing of the Black Madonna and these images that I've shown you?
I think a lot of the whitewashing is kind of do you think it's probably associated with like in the 19th century when the classics kind of started getting picked up again? Like they found a lot of antique statues from Greco-Roman times, but like the paint had already worn away and were quite pale.
Yep.
And this was kind of like the beginning of like imperialism.
I don't know if it's imperialism, but it's definitely a part of imperialism, right? No, you're absolutely correct, actually. The white statues that we normally see from the Greco-Roman world were brilliantly vibrant, colorful statues, and we have the pieces of the pigments that came off of them. I think what's more evocative for me is that when research started coming out that those statues actually were very colorful statues, and this wasn't research that was arguing that they were black or any other way except white, but that they were colorful. There was a huge backlash, and these researchers got death threats from white supremacists and other groups because they were arguing that these white statues that they revered were colorful. So you can see colonialism is alive and well, unfortunately. Are these acts what coined the term whitewashing? I don't think it's what coined the term whitewashing, but it's definitely an absolutely primary example of whitewashing, because it is literally whitewashing these particular statues. Excellent.
I think the particular term whitewashing actually came from that era as well, because they thought that the colors on the statues were a mistake, so they scrubbed them off.
Well, they didn't. A lot of the colors came off as a result of just wear and tear of everyday life. But you're absolutely right. There were some that were deliberately washed to this extent as well. Whitewashing can mean painting something white as well, which, in this particular case, it's a balance of taking the blackness off of something to make it white, because what's underneath it is wood, right? So they're taking the kind of the front part of it off. And so the original meaning, you're right, Demissy, is that idea of painting something white. It's also it's a construction term, right? Where it's a whitewashing as part of the construction. The idea that the sculptures you see are have the blue eyes underneath. Well, I don't know. I don't know how much of this is due to what was actually a part of the sculpture to begin with, and what was added to the sculpture when it was cleaned. So there's a lot of controversy about how that actually happened. Told that the Madonna at Montserrat, which is another one in Spain that's very famous, the blackened by smoke, and yeah, that is another possibility that research is looking at, as if they were blackened by smoke, but they chose not to take that off out of respect, because there were people going to them, because it was actually a Black Madonna. So there's all kinds of different histories behind these, and different ones have different types of histories. The one from Poland, for example, originally started as a Black Madonna. There's a difference between a painting and a statue. Excellent. All right. To move on. So moving away from religious mothers for a second, I'd like to talk about queen mothers in particular. Again, there are so many different directions this particular talk could go, so don't think that this is the only thing that is about the medieval Black mother, but it's kind of representative of some of the things that I've come across in the last few years. The Black mother is really a strongly represented figure. If any of you have seen Black Panther, there's the queen character, Queen Ramonda, played by Angela Bassett in that particular one, is a really interesting example. This is African futurism. There's also called Afrofuturism. There's a debate about what the actual term should be. It's the idea that there's different kinds of African futurism that it can be science fiction or fantasy that is Black oriented, Black centered. It can also go back to pre-transatlantic slave trade times and ask the question of what would happen if the slave trade hadn't happened. And that's what exists within this Black Panther world. I find it interesting. Black Panther is just cool, period. But I find it interesting because in reality, if we think about it, Wakanda, the fictional world in Black Panther, is actually, it could be a representation of what a medieval Africa would have become if it hadn't been interrupted, right? So we have these, and even the actors themselves talk about, Dana Guerrero with her character General Okoye talked about she protects what would have been, right? What would have been if the slave trade had not occurred and colonialism had not occurred. But in particular, Angela Bassett talks about the fact that the kings are kings because of their queens, right? The queens are a very important aspect of this particular culture, and that they have to be there in order for the kings to be able to do what they do and become what they become. Now, this is not an African feature. We do have queen mothers that exist almost in all medieval societies. Probably the most famous is Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was the queen mother of Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, and King John. So she's one of my favorite characters ever, so I always like to highlight her. She was actually a regent, which I'll talk about in a second. We also have Blanche of Castile, who in France, who served as a queen mother. I'm going to move down here. This is Agnes of Brandenburg in Denmark. We also have global medieval characters. So we have Gayatri Rayapatni from Indonesia, who served as a queen mother. And then if you're familiar with Beowulf, you might know Wealhtheow, who is also a queen mother and has some of the best, as far as I'm concerned, speeches in the entire text of Beowulf about protecting her children and doing the things necessary to do that. So definitely we have real character, we have real queen mothers, and we have fictional ones across the global Middle Ages. But in Africa, what I find really interesting is this idea that they're codified to a certain extent. There are names and positions for queen mothers, title holders that exist in pre-modern Africa. I give you a few of them from this article by Farrar. The Akan is Ohema, female ruler. Mane, community mother. Magira, female monarch. Iaoba, titled mother of the king. The fact that these are actual codified positions is very important. By the way, I love this this is an ivory pendant mask from Benin to honor King Esigi's mother, Idia. One of the other reasons I like her, she was a healer. And supposedly those holes you see in the center supposedly were to hold specific things that she used in her healing processes. So it's a really fascinating mask. It's beautiful too. So we have queens who have the titles of queen mother, or all of the titles that are represented there that I showed you. Their different tribes have different ones. But then we have queens who also happen to be mothers. And you have, for example, Akahina, also another one shown me from a community member. This was the Amazigh, which I don't use the term Berber because Berber has colonial connotations. It's from the term barbarian. The actual term that they call themselves is the Amazigh. And this is 7th century Algeria. This is a statue to Akahina. She's awesome, and I want about 60 movies of her to be made because her story is really interesting. She fought all kinds of battles and kept all kinds of invaders at bay. And she ended up actually telling her sons, her children, to go to the other side while she kept on fighting so that she could protect her children. She's quite a fascinating character, but we have quite a few of those in African history. The one I want to focus on is Sogolon Condé. She's the queen mother of Mali. So if you, the Epic of Sundiata, and Sundiata he was the first emperor of Mali, the one who brought Mali together in medieval Mali. And she's his mother. And in the epic, she has a very specific character and a very interesting character. She's described as ugly. She's hideous. Has on her back a disfiguring hump. Her son, Sundiata, for the first part of his life was disabled. He couldn't walk. And so she tried everything she could from her healing powers to be able to help that. As a sorceress, she also did that. She's described as a wise mother. And at the end of her life, she's described as knowing that she had nurtured their son for whom the world was waiting, which sounds, by the way, a lot like Mary when you think about it. And she knew now her mission was accomplished, while that of Sundiata was about to begin. The fact that her job and her relationship to Sundiata was over just as her son was about to fulfill the prophecy to become the emperor of Mali. So quite a bit going on there. I do want to return to this piece where Sundiata is conceived through rape. There's a prophecy that this figure, this Sogolon character, is going to show up, and that the king should marry her and conceive a son because he's going to be the one who unifies and takes over Mali. And she does everything that she possibly can to hold him off. She uses her sorcery to try to fight with his spirit and his wraith. But in the end, he basically ends up scaring her into a faint, and he rapes her while she has fainted. And so Sunjata is a character that is conceived in this rape. This is not unusual, unfortunately, when it comes to the Black mother in particular, and honestly motherhood throughout time as well. This is definitely a storyline that is fairly common. I put here from Harriet Jacobs, who lived in the Civil War, and she wrote about the life around her. And this was a very, I thought, evocative statement. "The secrets of slavery are concealed like those of the Inquisition. My master was, to my knowledge, the father of 11 slaves. But did the mothers dare to tell who was the father of their children? Did the other slaves dare to allude to it, except in whispers among themselves? No, indeed, they knew too well the terrible consequences." And the fact that, there's a lot of stories like this, especially during the slave period, of conceptions and rape, and then on top of that, the children that came out of that, right? So there's all kinds of there's all kinds of history that goes into this, and it goes back a very long way. Unfortunately, it's still a very problematic issue for Black women today. The statistics on this: 1 in 4 Black girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18. 1 in 5 Black women are survivors of rape. More than 20% of Black women are raped during their lifetimes, a higher share than among women overall. So this line that goes back again to Sogolon, to Sheba, is still playing out and has a narrative that still exists today. The other part of that narrative is the pregnant Black body. And I like this image over here of Beyonce, because they liken her to the Black Madonna, which I thought was a really interesting, and she kind of deliberately channeled that image in her choice of wardrobe. So on one hand, we have kind of the celebration of the pregnant Black body in this fashion. But on the other hand, there are all kinds of issues that still exist. 1, conceptions and rape. 2, this idea that pregnancy-related deaths for Black is higher than those of white women in the United States. We have Black women are also more likely than white women to experience complications known as maternal morbidities during pregnancy. Black infants in America are now more than twice as likely to die as white infants, right? So these statistics really that tell different stories. Again, we have kind of the Black Madonna image, right? The reverential image of a pregnant mother, a pregnant Black body, but also all of the violence that exists as related to the pregnant Black body as well. I just found this information that I was not aware of before, but it's horrible. It's horrific. Dr. James Marion Sims is known as the father of gynecology, but how he became the father of gynecology was by experimenting on Black women in the South, especially pre-Civil War. So, rightfully so, these women should be called the mothers of gynecology. And we start starting to take those statues down of Sims. This was actually a statue that was taken down of him in Central Park. And you have this image of this woman holding the Believe Black Women statement that goes along with that. This is the last section that I have for you today on maternal multiplicities. There is really no one version of motherhood, and there's no one version of Black motherhood. I give you here from Beowulf, this is Grendel's mother, if you know the story. I call her the feral mother. She's kind of the wild protector, animal-like to a great extent. Here we have the good mother. Again, I want about 60 movies of this woman as well. Datal Hima is a fascinating character in this 12th century. She's in several, but this is one directly about her, which is set in the Arab-Byzantine Wars and in the 8th and 9th centuries. She's a warrior. She's a leader. She's self-trained. She becomes a mother through rape of Abd al-Wahhab, and he is described as black-skinned, which is strange because the family is not. So she has a black child, and there's it really kind of the science that they try to explain this by is that she was raped when she had her period, and therefore the black menses, the black blood, was transferred to the body of the child. In that same story, we have a pretty good example of the bad mother. This one, she's from Ethiopia. She's the daughter of Damadan. He's the Ethiopian king. She ends up killing her father, which is both regicide and patricide. She becomes a renowned warrior as well, raised amongst brothers. She kills one of them, which is fratricide. Then she becomes the wife of Abd al-Wahhab, which is Datal Hima's son. She was captured and she met him and helped him escape and all those sorts of things. She ended up being under command of Datal Hima, became one of the foremost warriors, but converted to Muslim faith and then Christian faith. Her son was taken whenever he was born and became a Christian, and so she converted to Christianity when she found him. Unfortunately, she also killed him, which is filicide. So she's got all of the sides going on in her particular story. And then she ends up getting killed in battle by her former mother-in-law. The story is really fascinating because it really does follow a bunch of warrior women who either fight with Datal Hima or fight against her. And she ends up conquering them. So there's really this idea, this element of female bonding that exists. And these characters, again, as mothers, and how they respond to each other based upon the needs of their children and what they're either protecting their children or fighting against them, or different characteristics of that. Another example that I'd like to point out is the other, or the stepmother. We're kind of used to this in fairy tales, but in medieval Africa in particular, this becomes an aspect of a lot of stories because kings could have multiple wives, so they could have co-wives, and so now you have a different system in place, right? This idea that there's children from different mothers who have different roles, who have different places, and this is Sasuma. She's the co-wife of Sogolon Condé. She already had a child before Sundiata came along, but he didn't have any prophecies about him, so they were really worried about Sundiata and if he was going to take over the inheritance. And so she ended up persecuting Sogolon and Sundiata, but out of fear for her son's titled inheritance. It doesn't seem to be out of particular hatred for Sogolon as so much as worried about if her son's inheritance is going to be taken away. So she plays a role in that text as well. Final thoughts as I rush through this to get us to some time for questions and answers. I just want to leave you with the idea that there's complexity of medieval families, that there's as much going on in pre-modern families as there are going on in today's families. And so thinking about them as a complex entity is very important. The religious imagery that exists around the Black Mother is also very a key element here. Again, despite whether or not some images are intended to be Black or not, they are thought of as Black by their audiences and believed and viewed that way. And so that becomes a very important aspect. Whitewashing is a very important aspect as well. I do want to highlight again this idea of violence on Black and female bodies. Again, rape is not exclusive to Black mothers, but there is a long history of that within the Black mother tradition. And this idea of a multiplicity of representations. There isn't a good mother. There aren't all good mothers. They aren't all bad mothers. They have various and different nuanced characteristics depending on the stories that they exist in and their roles that they have. And I'll give you this link, but I have a biography and further reading in case you're interested in any of these topics. So, questions?
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I have a question about
In your
Madonna
explorations,
of
have you come? Oh, sorry.
Hold on, Luis, hold on. Ursula?
Yeah, I have a question about the Madonna of Chartres who was cleaned. Do we know what her body looked under her garments?
I don't.
Well, you know,
it's an excellent question, actually. I've never heard if they actually had any
like her arms or neck, you know.
They didn't put I know that the raiments were created later, so they weren't original to the first incarnation. So that's a really good question. I never thought to ask what was underneath the garments. I guess I should have.
All right.
Sorry, Ursula. Maybe I can see if I can research that. See if I can find it. Luis, did you have one?
In your research, have you ever come across, I guess, examples of fierce Black mothers, similar to Azili Danter, like in Haiti?
Oh,
Yeah.
a lot of the ones that I was talking about fall into that category as well. You don't mess with moms. All right, that's a long-standing understanding and tradition that you don't get between a mother and a child. Right? So there's all kinds of stories about what mothers do for the first mother and what she's willing to do to protect her child. So absolutely. Alan, did you have a question? You're on mute, Alan. Alan, you're on mute. Were you trying to ask a question? Well, Alan's figuring that out. Anybody else have a question? Or thoughts?
Hey, Keisha, this is Dee. How did you get interested? You probably said it, and I was dealing with kids, but how did you get interested in this area of medieval study?
So a lot of this for me came after the Charlottesville riots. And after the Charlottesville riots, there was a lot of medieval imagery that was used at Charlottesville, and a lot of it was used by white supremacists. And while I knew that this all happened, it was a big wake-up call for me and for a lot of medievalists. And I started, well, first of all, looking into the medieval imagery that white supremacists were using. Then I started looking into the kind of white fantasies that they were trying to prescribe to. And then I wanted to, then I was going further into the realities of it all. And it just sort of snowballed and kept leading me into further stories and further literature to take a look at these. The medieval mother really came out of the call for Black History Month. When we were asked to take a look, I was like, I don't know that I have anything that would really fit into that. And I was like, wait a minute, I've been doing a lot with mothers when it comes down to a lot of these stories. And so then I started thinking about it in the broader context.
Yeah, I'll try now.
Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, good. Well, I love all the associations you make, and that was just fascinating. I have a question, though. You referred at the very end in summing up to the complex entity of all these mothers. And I wonder if you have a generic term for what that entity is.
Well, I mean, I've been calling them the maternal multiplicity, but I don't know that that's a particularly good one. I think it's just important to remember that when we refer to something like the medieval Black mother, like I titled this talk, that it really is a reference to more than one thing and more than one representation, right? It's not something that has, and that goes for anything medieval, but almost anything in general, that when we're talking about it, that we shouldn't just go with the stereotypes, and we shouldn't just go with the preconceived notions, that there's generally more going on behind almost any type of representation that we're talking about. And when it comes to the Black medieval mother, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot that I couldn't even touch on in an hour for a 45-minute talk. So it's just really important to remember that it's not just one representation ever, no matter what we're looking at.
I had another thought, Ursula. I have another thought. Do you think people flocked or are still flocking to the Black Madonnas because, especially in Europe, they look different, and they sort of knew the Madonna, the Mother of God, was different, and so they were attracted to their being different?
Yep. I think that's a very good point. We still don't know enough.
I'm trying.
It's okay. We still don't know enough about the where these came from, or why the tradition spread as much as it did. There are a lot of theories that exist out there. We haven't really decided for sure exactly what the case is. I think you have something there. This is a figure that looks different, right? This is a figure that that represents other things than what might be represented by, say, the white Mary that was, in a lot of different churches. And it also, I think, once you start seeing Christianity spreading to Africa and spreading to different places, you see, there's always that where cultures meet, right? And if Mary looks like me, I'm more likely to believe if she looks like me, right? So there's all kinds of things that are going on there. So I think you're definitely on to something. Yeah. Vida.
You just opened a whole new rabbit hole. And one of the things I was struck by is the essential differences between medieval mothers in matriarchal societies and medieval mothers in patriarchal societies.
Yep. You are absolutely correct on that. I was doing the research on those codified names, those titles and place, titles. And I was just like, this is fascinating, right? We do. I should have mentioned. I meant to go back to it. We do have things such as regents, who could be either female or male, in European culture. So we have, Eleanor of Aquitaine was a regent for her son for quite a while. So we do have some, but they're not specifically female, right? They don't have to be a female figure that represents that. So I think it's fascinating, right? This idea that these titles actually exist, and in some cases they are chosen separately from the king. So it's not actually sometimes the king's mother. It is simply this title person who is a mother who is in this particular position. The rabbit hole never ends on this particular one. There's a lot more to do there.
There's an old book that I keep going back to over and over. It's called Not in God's Image by Julia O'Fallon, and it chronicles the history of women and women's rights. It was written in the 70s, so it stops there. But what happened as patriarchal became more important as British common law came into place, as the church came into place, as we know, the Catholic Church, and what that did to women and women's rights.
And aside from the Black medieval mother, if we're talking about the Virgin Mary, her cult really came into popularity in Europe in 12th, 13th century, which really had an elevation of different women's status. It's actually, some people have argued that that's the golden age, or that's a Renaissance. Sorry, not golden age. Renaissance happened in the 12th and 13th centuries when this sort of thing happened. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that are going on there as far as the influence of colonialism, on all that, but also things that we don't really consider about women's station in pre-modern societies. Demisty, you're absolutely correct. The Black Madonna was protecting the pulse, and they can't be anything but a Black Madonna because of the miracle that saved them. Do you see evidence that correlates shifting definition of Blackness across the medieval period with regard to popular understanding of Black Mother? So this is a really deep question. This is a really, there's a lot going on in this question. So the shifting definitions of Blackness across the medieval period, this is something I haven't tracked yet. To see if the ideas about Blackness, the ideas about the racism, I hesitate to say it was a different definitions of racism for that time period. I haven't tracked it to the understandings of the medieval Black motherhood, but I think this would be something to really look into.
Yeah, I have another remark about the role of women and how women were portrayed during the Middle Ages and for a long time. We have to remember that these women were pregnant most of their times. They were confined at home, either having a newborn or being pregnant and taking care of these children. We shouldn't forget about that role, and that's why they are portrayed probably as mothers and not in any other role.
It's a very, motherhood, we often forget, is a role and is a job, right? In fact, there's a lot of discussion these days with the pandemic about the job of motherhood right now, right? I was reading some articles from the colleagues were posting about the forgotten positions of motherhood and what it actually entails and what it means and all that sort of thing. But also keep in mind, though, that that's kind of a preconception that they were confined as well. If you're on a poorer family, you don't have the time to be confined, right? You've got to be out working and doing whatever it is that you do. So it really also depends on what station you are in society as to whether or not you are confined or whether or not you are continue to be part of it while you're pregnant. Right.
Sure, but if you were in high society, of course, you had your servants, etc. But most of people were not, and there was no birth control, so that was it.
They were pregnant a lot. We'll just go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I mean, how far can we, I guess, place Black Madonnas? It just popped in my head that the Rom people kind of started migrating to Europe, like sometime the 1200s, some period like that. And I know that they also portray their Madonnas in a dark-skinned, melanistic way.
The medieval Madonna really came, around the 11th, 12th century started. You'll start seeing these figures around that time period. Other questions or thoughts? I did put the link to my presentation into the chat, so you're welcome to take that with you. I've been having way too much fun adding to the further reading and bibliography, so enjoy. I will probably add more as I find them. Great. In that case, thank you, everybody, and I hope you learned something.
Thank you.
Thank you again for another wonderful day.
Thank you, Vita. I love having you guys here.
Thank you, Professor Tracy. This was awesome. And thank you for providing additional resources so we can continue to learn about this topic and beyond.
You're welcome.
And this recording will be provided at a later date for everyone's follow-up and utilization as you wish. And we will be having another event at 6:00 p.m. Hopefully you'll be able to join us. Thank you, everyone. And once again, Professor Tracy, this was awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for all your help. Alice, hi. It's good to see your face. You're on mute, Alice.
Here we go.
There you go.
We use Zoom all the time.